I wrapped the gift the night before our anniversary, not because I was especially organized, but because I wanted it to feel intentional, thoughtful, like I had put time into it, into him. I always did that, didn't I? Put time into people like... I thought love could be measured in effort. I smoothed the edges of the paper until the corners were sharp enough to slice, tied the ribbon just right, and stepped back to admire my work. We'd been together 3 years, long enough to have habits, routines, inside jokes that had gotten stale but still made us laugh out of muscle memory. Our anniversary dinner was booked at his favorite steak place downtown, the one with dim lighting, overpriced wine, and those weird paintings of cows wearing crowns. I hated it. But I'd never told him that. He loved it, so I loved that he loved it. That used to be enough. I thought about the first anniversary, the one where we drank cheap wine in bed and he gave me a key to his flat. I remember how I cried. Not because I needed a key, but because it meant something. Like he was choosing me. I'd spent so long trying not to seem like someone who needed choosing. That night, while wrapping the gift, I wondered when that changed. When did I start feeling like a passenger instead of a partner? Maybe it was gradual, not a lightning bolt, but a slow drip. A little dismissive laugh here, a forgotten detail there. And still, I stayed. Still, I wrapped gifts and booked dinners, and wore his favorite color like a badge of honor. Navy blue. I looked like an extra in his story. The gift wasn't anything major, a leather-bound notebook. He said he wanted to start journaling more, said it helped him clear the fog. I even had his initials embossed on the front, gold against the dark brown. I remember thinking how proud he'd be of it, of me, for remembering. I placed the gift in my bag and looked at it again. It looked so normal, so harmless. I hadn't read the text yet, the one that would burn through everything like acid. That would make this gift go from a celebration to a punchline. But at that moment, I was still her. The version of me who believed him, who thought he saw me as a forever kind of person. I didn't know yet that I was a contingency plan, a placeholder, a soft landing in case plan A didn't work out. I smiled to myself in the mirror, completely unaware. I even practiced saying happy anniversary in that joking, sing-song voice he liked. It's strange, remembering that, knowing I was standing on a fault line, thinking it was solid ground. It happened the morning of our anniversary. I was making tea when my phone buzzed. He'd texted me, at least I thought he had. That wasn't unusual. We texted all the time, dumb little things. Don't forget we're out of oat milk, or bring that face you make when you want to annoy me. But this one was different. It said, "She's still on about next weekend. Don't stress. If it falls through, I've still got plan B." No context, no emojis, just flat and casual, like it wasn't about someone's actual feelings. Chapatanios. First, I thought maybe it wasn't meant for me. Maybe it was about some trip or work plan. I stared at it too long. You know when your brain tries to rearrange the words to make them mean something else? I did that. I tried to convince myself. Plan B was a joke. That maybe I was in on it, but then he sent another one. Sorry, wrong person. That was it. No explanation, no panic, no backpedal, just that. Wrong person. Like he'd accidentally handed the wrong coat to a stranger at a party. Didn't reply. My hands were shaking, and I wasn't even sure what emotion I was supposed to feel first. Rage, embarrassment, grief? I felt all three like waves overlapping and crashing in on each other. But mostly, I felt stupid. Plan B. Not a partner, not a priority, not even a person, really. Just a backup. Just something to fall back on. I sat down at the kitchen table and read the message again and again, trying to find a way out. Like maybe if I read it enough, I'd find a hidden clause that meant I misunderstood. That I wasn't plan B. Just mislabeled, misloved, mismatched. He didn't follow up. No call, no explanation, just silence. I imagined him seeing the read receipt, watching the little delivered checkmark go green, and deciding, deliberately, not to fix it. Not to explain or grovel or even lie. That part hurt the most. Not that he'd said it, but that he didn't care that I'd seen it. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just felt cold, detached, like the moment had split me from myself. And I was watching it happen to someone else, some girl he didn't think twice about. The kettle had boiled and gone cold again. I hadn't even made the tea. I didn't respond. I didn't ask questions. I didn't give him the satisfaction of knowing I was hurt. I just stared at that message for an hour, then deleted our whole thread. But I screenshotted the text first. Some part of me knew I might want to frame it. I didn't cancel the dinner. That surprises people when I tell them. Like they expect I should have called it off immediately, thrown his clothes in a bin, burned his favorite hoodie, blocked his number, and vanished. But here's the truth. I needed to see him lie to my face. I needed the performance. We had a 7:30 reservation at the same bistro we went to the night we made things official. One of those dimly lit, overpriced places with sticky menus disguised as rustic charm. He picked it, of course, said it would be romantic. I got there early. I wore the navy dress he once said made me look like a woman who knows too much. Back then, it felt like a compliment. Tonight, it felt like prophecy. He was late, 8 minutes, which, in normal life, is nothing. But when someone's called you their backup plan, 8 minutes feels like a lifetime they spent deciding whether to show up at all. He arrived with that same easy smile he always wore when he wanted something, usually forgiveness or sex. He kissed my cheek and slid into the booth like everything was normal. "Happy anniversary," he said, like he hadn't just casually dismantled me by accident 2 nights ago. I smiled back, not because I meant it, but because I wanted to see how far he'd go. We ordered wine. He toasted us, like there was still an us to raise a glass to. I clinked mine against his and wondered if he noticed I hadn't said a word yet. He launched into small talk. Work. His stupid gym mate who kept using his protein powder. Something about his boss's new car. His voice filled the space like background noise. I just watched him. He didn't bring it up. Not the message, not the wrong person excuse. Not even a faint, "How are you?" He had decided to pretend it hadn't happened. He had gambled on my silence being a form of acceptance. That hurt more than the text itself, somehow, because silence to him meant safety. It meant I was still here, still showing up, still playing the part of the loving girlfriend. But I wasn't playing anymore. Halfway through his second glass, I reached into my bag. I could feel his eyes follow me, maybe wondering if I was pulling. Out a gift, I was. I placed a small, neatly wrapped box on the table and slid it towards him. He looked pleased with himself, like he thought this was the part where I tell him how lucky I am, where I cry over a necklace or watch and say something like, "You really didn't have to." He unwrapped it with too much confidence. The tissue paper fell away. Inside was a wooden photo frame. And inside that frame, the screenshot, the text. "She's still on about next weekend. Don't stress. If it falls through, I've still got plan B." He froze. No more words. No more casual grins. His mouth hung open, caught between some instinct to lie and another to explain. But I wasn't finished. I handed him a folded piece of card. He opened it slowly like it might explode. And inside, in my handwriting, were the words. I just became plan A for someone better. For a few seconds, maybe more, the restaurant around us blurred into nothing. The clatter of cutlery, low laughter, and bad jazz faded. All I could hear was the sharp inhale he took when he read the note. He didn't look up right away. He just stared at the words like they might rearrange themselves into something gentler if he blinked enough. But they didn't. They were steady, final, like me. Then he said my name, softly, like he'd forgotten how it tasted. Wait. I stood up. I didn't need to hear what came after that. The excuses, the backtracking, the pitiful reach for context. There's no context that makes Plan B acceptable. I don't care. If she canceled, I don't care if I was the one you always really wanted. If I wasn't Plan A from the start, I was never truly in the running. He reached for my hand across the table, but I stepped back. People were watching now. The couple behind him had gone quiet. A waitress paused mid-pour. Let them watch. Maybe someone would finally write a real review of this place. came for the duck confit, stayed for the emotional detonation at table 9. I grabbed my coat and my bag. My phone was already in my hand, half because I didn't want to look at him and half because I knew if I didn't walk out now, I never would. "Please," he said again, standing up like that would stop me. "Can we talk?" We just did. I turned, heels clicking, spine straight, not once looking back. The moment I stepped outside, the cold hit me in the face. It was sharp and bracing, the kind of wind that cuts through fabric and into your bones. And still I breathed easier. No arm around my shoulders trying to steer me back into comfort. No lies being packaged into neat little sentences for my convenience. Just air, just sky, just me. I walked. Nowhere in particular at first. I wandered down side streets and past shuttered shops, each step dissolving another piece of him from my mind. My fingers tingled from the cold, but I didn't care. My whole body felt awake, present, alive, in me, a way it hadn't in months. I ended up at a bus stop, the kind with a cracked glass panel and a single flickering light. I sat down and laughed, not because anything was funny, but because of the absurdity of it all. One text. That's all it took to shatter the illusion I'd been holding onto like a lifeline. One clumsy, callous mistake. And somehow, it was the most honest thing he'd ever said. As I waited, I opened my phone. No new messages, no apologies yet. He was probably still sitting at that table, trying to decide if chasing me would make him look noble or desperate. Let him stew. I had places to be, people to become. And tonight, for the first time in a long while, I wasn't anyone's option. I wasn't waiting to be picked. I already had been. By myself. I hadn't expected him to message me. Not straight away, at least. I figured there would be some time to let the dust settle, to let him stew in the mess he'd made. I was right. Sort of. It took him a few hours, which I thought was respectful, in a way. He probably needed the time to figure out what to say that wouldn't make him sound like a complete coward. But when he finally did text, the words were so predictable it almost made me sick. "Can we talk?" No apology. Not even a hint of accountability. Just a vague request to talk, as if that would somehow erase everything that had already been said between us. Every cruel, thoughtless line that was now floating in the air like smoke. He didn't get it. He never would. But still, I opened my phone, staring at the message for longer than I should have. I almost typed something back. Almost. I wanted to tell him that it wasn't just the text that had broken everything, that it was everything that came before. The little things, the way he never quite committed, never really saw me for who I was. But in the end, I deleted it. It wouldn't make a difference. He wouldn't hear me. Instead, I decided to do something I hadn't done in months. Call a friend. It's funny how we all get so used to being our own emotional support system, like we're somehow supposed to have all the answers. I've spent so many nights alone in my head that I forgot what it felt like to lean on someone else. So when Kate picked up the phone, I couldn't hide the relief in my voice. "You'll never guess what happened," I said, before she could even say hello. "Actually, no, scratch that. I'm sure you could guess. I think everyone could." Kate was quiet for a beat, probably weighing her options. She knew me too well to interrupt, so I just kept talking. "I got Plan B'd," I said, finally, letting the words hang in the air like an insult. It felt good to say it out loud, almost like I was reclaiming it somehow. "What do you mean, Plan B?" she asked, cautious now. She knew about the anniversary dinner, knew how much I'd been hoping for it to be different. I took a deep breath. He texted me, "Plan B, Kate." He called me that. And I just had to show him. I had to let him know that I'm not some backup plan, not anymore. So, I gave him the framed text with a note saying I'd become Plan A for someone else. He deserves that, you know? He deserves the reminder that he's not the one who gets to define my worth. I heard Kate inhale sharply. "Oh, wow, that's pretty intense." "Yeah, well," I sighed, "intense is what it takes to cut through the crap." She was silent for a moment. "Do you want to talk about it? Or do you want to just have a drink and forget about him for a while?" I smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "Can we do both?" I'll be over in 20. I'll bring wine. You pick the music. Deal, I said. And just like that, I was no longer alone. No longer sitting in my own self-righteous anger, trying to make sense of a situation. That didn't deserve any more of my time. I was going to let it go. I was going to drink, laugh, and just let everything else fall where it may. Maybe that's what I needed. A distraction, a way to remind myself that there was more to me than this drama, than him. A few hours later, Kate arrived at my flat with a bottle of rosé and a bag of snacks. We didn't need to talk much. Just a few sips of wine, a few songs that made us laugh, and the kind of easy conversation that can only come from someone who knows you inside and out. And for the first time since I'd left that restaurant, I felt like myself again. The thing about breaking up with someone, or whatever this mess was, is that it's never really over when you think it is. The aftermath lingers like a bad smell, even when you try to scrub it away. I'd given him the framed text, which felt like a small victory, but it wasn't enough. I'd needed to make him see me for who I really was, to show him that I wasn't a footnote in his life anymore. But the truth is, I was still tangled in his story, and I didn't know how to stop reading. I woke up the next day with my phone buzzing on the bedside table, the screen flashing his name. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, blocking him entirely, but something kept me rooted to the spot, that deep sense of curiosity. What was he going to say now? I reached for it, still half asleep. His message was simple. Can we meet? I need to talk. I froze. There it was again, that desperate need for closure. His closure, not mine. I knew I should ignore him, should tell him to move on. But in that moment, I felt something shift. Maybe it was the wine from the night before, or the exhaustion from the emotional roller coaster. But something inside me was tired of playing games. He didn't get to control the narrative anymore. I wasn't waiting for his permission to move forward. I already had. So, I replied, no. I didn't need to explain myself. I didn't owe him anything more than I'd already given. I set the phone down and turned over, burying my face in the pillow. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was drowning in the mess of him. There was this strange, almost surreal sense of peace. I'd made my choice. And it wasn't about him. It wasn't about me proving anything to him. It was about me choosing me for once. The next few days were quiet, which was a blessing. I stayed busy, meeting up with Kate when I needed a laugh, making progress at work, and even picking up some old hobbies I'd neglected. I wasn't looking for distractions. I was simply rediscovering the parts of myself that I'd let slide. It wasn't easy. I still had moments when I'd check my phone for messages, half expecting him to suddenly appear, asking for forgiveness. But when it didn't happen, when he didn't come crawling back like I thought he would, I realized that I was the one who needed to come back to myself. Kate was the first to notice the change. We were having drinks at a small bar downtown when she raised an eyebrow at me, a playful glint in her eye. "What's going on with you?" she asked, taking a sip of her gin. "You're acting different." I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Nothing, just moving on." "Yeah?" she asked, leaning in closer. "Because I've got to say, you look like someone who's ready to set the world on fire." It made me laugh. It wasn't what I'd expected to hear, but it was exactly what I needed. "Maybe I am," I said, smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. Maybe I finally realized I'm worth more than whatever he could offer me. She clinked her glass against mine. "That's the spirit. So what's next for you, Plan A?" The question hit me harder than I thought it would. For so long, I'd been waiting for someone to tell me what came next. I was so used to letting other people dictate the terms of my life that I hadn't considered the possibility of writing my own story. Maybe it was time I did. It's strange how we often think we know exactly where we're going in life, only to find that the path shifts under our feet when we least expect it. That's what I felt as I walked into the coffee shop that morning, laptop in tow, ready to work. There was a sense of liberation in my steps, but there was also a whisper of uncertainty I couldn't shake off. Was I really moving on, Or was I just bearing the past to avoid confronting the truth? I ordered my usual black coffee, no sugar, and took a seat by the window. The place was busy as always. People typed away on their laptops, discussing business deals and upcoming projects, the usual buzz of caffeine-fueled ambition. But today, it felt different. It felt like I was finally where I belonged. It was as though I'd spent so long worrying about everyone else's narratives that I had forgotten to write my own. I opened my laptop, but before I could even pull up my latest project, a notification popped up on my screen. It was from him. I didn't have to look at the name. I knew who it was. I stared at the message for a while. The temptation to open it was there, pulling me in, but instead of giving into the urge, I just closed the laptop. No, I whispered to myself. I'm done. And just like that, it felt as though I had crossed some invisible threshold. The weight that had been sitting on my chest, the feeling of being stuck in someone else's story evaporated. I wasn't going back to him. I wasn't waiting for him to show up and redeem himself. I was choosing something different. I leaned back in my chair, breathing deeply. Maybe it wasn't the easiest thing to do, but it was the right thing. Later that day, I received another message, and another. He was relentless now, apologizing, pleading, even sending an image of the framed text I'd given him. His message read, "I never meant to hurt you. I just wasn't ready to see you as Plan A, but I am now." I exhaled sharply, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. But then I thought about what Kate had said. Plan A. For the first time in ages, I wasn't interested in being anyone's backup. I wasn't interested in being someone's second choice. I was going to be Plan A for myself. So, instead of replying, I did something I hadn't done in months. I turned my phone off. It wasn't about him. It wasn't about any closure he thought I needed. It was about me. About taking back the control I'd unknowingly given away. I had the power to choose what my next step was. I was no longer waiting for him to determine my worth. The sounds that followed were quieter. He didn't stop trying to reach me, but I stayed firm. And slowly, without the noise of his messages, I began to build something new. I didn't have the answers yet, but for the first time in ages, I felt like I was finally heading in the right direction. I was writing my own story, and no one was going to change that. I didn't expect the silence to feel so heavy. There was something unnerving about it, like the moment when a storm finally passes, leaving behind a stillness that makes you question whether the worst is really over. The texts had stopped coming in, but with that absence came a sort of void. No more late-night messages. No more questions that kept me awake. It was as though the chapters we'd written together had abruptly ended, and now I was left to figure out how to write the next one alone. The hardest part wasn't even the absence of his messages. It was the space they'd once occupied in my mind. I found myself, more often than I cared to admit, still thinking about the way he used to make me feel. Not the Plan B version of me, but the one before all of this. When things were simple and good. Before I knew too much, felt too much. I spent the next few days trying to focus. I threw myself into work, meetings, brainstorming sessions. I was determined to keep myself occupied. After all, distraction was the quickest way to avoid facing the reality that the person I thought I'd be with wasn't the one I was meant to end up with. But there was still this quiet gnawing at the back of my mind, a reminder that I hadn't fully let go of him. Kate's words echoed in my head. Your Plan A for someone better. It wasn't just about him, it was about me, about making sure I didn't settle for the crumbs when there was a whole feast out there waiting for me. The truth was, I was still holding on to the idea of who he was, the potential that he could be the one to finally get it. But there was no point in waiting for a person to change, to become something they hadn't shown themselves to be. People showed you who they were. They always did. And I had ignored that truth for far too long. On my way home that evening, I stopped at a little bookstore near my apartment. It was one of those places you could lose yourself in for hours. Quiet, cozy, with the kind of smell only old books had. I wandered through the aisles, letting my fingers trace the spines of books I'd never read. but that had always intrigued me. A particular title caught my eye: The Art of Letting Go. It was as if the universe had handed me a sign. I picked it up without hesitation. That night, I sank into my bed with the book, feeling the weight of it in my hands. The first few pages were all about the importance of shedding the past, releasing what no longer served you. The concept was simple, but the execution, well, that was the tricky part. But the more I read, the more I realized something. Letting go wasn't just about cutting ties. It wasn't just about blocking him on everything, or leaving him in the past. It was about releasing the emotional baggage I'd carried with me for so long. It was about allowing myself the space to move forward, to make room for something or someone new. I closed the book, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me. It wasn't about erasing him from my life, but rather about accepting that he wasn't going to be the person who defined my future. I had to be the one to do that. And so, I made a promise to myself that night. I wouldn't hold on to something that had already ended. I wouldn't keep letting the idea of us keep me tethered to a version of myself that no longer fit. Tomorrow, I'd wake up and take another step forward. The morning felt different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there was this small, almost imperceptible shift, like a door had opened. And for the first time in a while, I wasn't afraid to walk through it. Maybe it was the book. Maybe it was the realization that I no longer had to carry the weight of someone else's expectations. I didn't have to play the backup. The second choice, the placeholder in someone's story. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror that morning, staring at my reflection. It wasn't the kind of thing I usually did. I didn't typically scrutinize every detail of my face or body, but today was different. I looked at myself like I hadn't in a long time. Really looked. And for the first time in months, I saw someone who was strong, someone who was worthy of better, someone who deserved to be seen for who she truly was. I smiled at the woman in the mirror, then did something I hadn't done in ages. I took a picture of myself, a simple, unfiltered photo, just me in my pajamas, with no pretenses. Just me, and it felt good. As I went through my day, I noticed I wasn't dragging myself through it. There was a lightness to everything, like I could finally breathe. I didn't have to keep looking over my shoulder, wondering if he was going to text, wondering if I was still part of his life. Because in truth, I wasn't. And I was okay with that. I walked into my office, greeted by a warm smile from Leah, who always seemed to know when something was off. She didn't ask any questions, though, just handed me a coffee and went back to her work, knowing I'd talk when I was ready. The hours went by faster than I expected. I was so caught up in the tasks at hand that I didn't realize how much time had passed until I looked at the clock and saw it was already late afternoon. By the time I was ready to leave, the office was quieter, the buzz of activity replaced with the hum of the lights and the occasional shuffle of papers. As I gathered my things, my phone buzzed in my bag. I knew exactly who it was before I even looked at the screen. It was him. I didn't have to check the name. I already knew. My heart skipped a beat, but not in the way it used to. It wasn't a flutter of excitement or nervousness, but something different. Almost like a detached curiosity, like I was looking at a past version of myself that I no longer recognized. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to. The thought of replying or even reading it felt unnecessary. I had nothing left to say to him. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat of my car and drove home. There were no tears waiting for me when I walked through the door. No emotional turmoil swirling in my chest. Just a quiet sense of calm. The kind of calm that comes from knowing you've made the right decision. That evening, I made myself dinner. A simple meal, nothing fancy, just something to nourish me. I sat at the kitchen table alone, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lonely. I felt at peace. Later, as I sat down on the couch with my cup of tea, I thought about what had happened over the last few months. How much of it had been driven by the desire to be loved, to be seen. But now, I understood something more important. I had to love myself first. that was the only love that would ever truly matter. And in that moment, I promised myself something I hadn't in a long time. I was going to stop waiting for someone else to define my worth. I would no longer let anyone's actions dictate how I saw myself. I was enough, just as I was. Tomorrow would be a new day, and it would be mine. The next few days passed by in a blur of routine, but I noticed something subtle, something that had been missing for so long. A shift, a quiet surge of confidence that had been absent for too long. It was like I had finally stepped into my own shoes, comfortable and assured. At work, I wasn't the same person I had been. I walked into meetings with my head held higher. I spoke up, offering ideas without second-guessing myself. And when a project I'd been working on for months got the green light, I felt a rush of pride. Not because I was proving something to anyone, but because I was proving something to myself. Leah had noticed the change, of course. She was the first one to comment on how different I seemed. "You've got this new energy about you," she said one morning over coffee. "What's going on?" I smiled and took a slow sip of my drink, feeling the warmth spread through me. I guess I'm just done. Done with waiting for things to change, done with hoping for things to work out. I'm choosing to move forward. No more looking back. Leah. Raised an eyebrow, but she didn't push. Instead, she gave me a nod of approval, like she knew exactly what I meant. And that was all I needed. Someone who understood without needing to ask for details. As the days wore on, I started making plans for myself. Things I'd put off for months, even years. Trips I'd wanted to take, books I'd wanted to read, places I'd wanted to visit. Now, they were no longer just dreams. They were goals. The real turning point came on a Saturday afternoon, about a week after I'd stopped responding to his messages. I had my phone on silent, tucked away in my bag, as I strolled through a local art gallery, the soft hum of the music in the background, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee from the cafe downstairs filled the space, making everything feel grounded. I paused in front of a painting, a vibrant, abstract piece that made me feel both calm and alive at the same time. There was something about it that resonated with me, something that felt like a reflection of my current state. I reached for my phone, half expecting another text from him, but when I looked at the screen, I saw only one notification. It was from my bank, and for the first time in a long time, that was the only thing that mattered. I'd been so focused on other people's expectations, so wrapped up in waiting for things to shift, that I'd forgotten to focus on the one person who had the power to change everything. Me. I didn't check his message. I didn't need to. Instead, I turned my attention back to the painting and then walked over to the nearby bench to sit, letting the moment wash over me. For the first time in months, I felt no desire to look back, no need to wonder if he was thinking about me. I didn't need his approval anymore. I was already whole. I spent the rest of the afternoon wandering the gallery, taking in the art, letting it inspire me. When I finally left, I felt lighter, like I was walking on air. That night, as I sat on my couch with a book in hand, I reflected on everything that had led me to this point. The mistakes, the heartache, the uncertainty. It had all been a part of my journey. And now I was writing my own story. A story that wasn't defined by someone else's text message or their idea of who I should be. It was mine to write. And as I flipped through the pages of my book, I smiled at the thought of what was coming next. The next few weeks felt like an unfolding story. It wasn't as dramatic as I had imagined, but it was exactly what I needed. Things began to fall into place in ways I hadn't expected. I started dating again. Not seriously, but just enough to feel like I was part of the world again. Nothing earth-shattering, but every little date reminded me that I was capable of opening up to new possibilities. Leah and I spent more time together, and I noticed something else. She was the person who made me feel like everything was going to be okay, no matter what. Her support, her no-questions-asked friendship, became a cornerstone of my new life. I didn't need to explain everything to her. I didn't need to justify my decisions. She just accepted me as I was, and that was enough. One night, as we sat in my living room with a bottle of wine between us, she asked, So, how are you feeling about him? The question hit me like a wave, but I didn't panic. I wasn't ashamed of my past anymore. I had embraced it, every single part of it. Honestly, I'm fine. I've let it go. I think I always knew, deep down, that I wasn't his priority. I was just waiting around for someone to choose me. But I've realized something. I don't need someone else to validate me. I'm doing it for myself now. Leah raised her glass in a toast. To that. To that, I echoed, clinking my glass with hers. I didn't feel bitter anymore. I had come to terms with everything. I had found peace in the fact that my worth wasn't tied to someone who couldn't see it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I'd been waiting for a moment of clarity that would never come from him. I had been expecting him to change, to see me differently, but the truth was that the change I needed had to come from me. That week, I ran into him at a mutual friend's party. The encounter wasn't planned, and it caught me off guard, but I didn't flinch. For the first time, I saw him not as the person who had hurt me, but as someone who was no longer a part of my story. He smiled when he saw me, looking genuinely happy to see me again. "Hey," he said, his voice a little softer than I remembered. "It's been a while. How have you been?" I met his eyes, my gaze steady. "I'm good, actually. Really good." He seemed surprised by my response. It wasn't the reaction he had expected. But I didn't care. "You look different," he said, like more confident. "I am," I replied, offering him a polite smile, "and I'm really happy about it." I could see the shift in his expression, a mixture of confusion and realization. I didn't feel the need to explain further. The truth was simple. I had moved on, and I wasn't going back. We chatted for a few more minutes, but I could tell he was struggling to find the right words. The conversation felt forced, like he was searching for something that wasn't there anymore. I could have stayed longer, but I didn't. I excused myself and made my way to the other side of the room, feeling a quiet satisfaction wash over me. Later that night, as I sat in my car on the way home, I realized how far I had come. The weight of the past no longer weighed me down. I didn't need to carry his mistakes with me. I didn't need to question my worth. I was finally free. When I got home, I took out the framed text message from the anniversary dinner and looked at it again. It wasn't just a reminder of the hurt. It was a symbol of everything I had overcome. I had chosen myself, and I was proud of that decision. The next morning, as I prepared for a new week, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope for the future. Hope for what was to come. The best part was knowing that I was the one writing my story now. It's funny how life has a way of making you feel like you're always on the edge of something new. When everything feels like it's finally falling into place, you can't help but wonder what's next. But I wasn't rushing this time. For once, I was content with how things were going, and that in itself was a small victory. I continued to focus on myself. Work was picking up again, and I'd started taking on more challenging projects. There was a part of me that still had that lingering hunger, that drive to prove I was capable of more. I wasn't sure what my next step would be, but I was excited to find out. Every new opportunity felt like a puzzle piece I had yet to fit into place. Leah had suggested a weekend getaway, a chance for us to recharge. I wasn't sure about taking time off, but I knew I needed to. And I also realized that part of me was still holding back from fully embracing the freedom that came with not being tied to the past. So, I agreed. We spent the weekend in a cabin, by the lake, surrounded by nothing but trees, fresh air, and quiet. It was the kind of peaceful solitude I hadn't realized I needed. I spent most of my time reading, journaling, and just being present. No distractions, no expectations. Just me in the moment. Leah and I talked about everything and nothing. We talked about our dreams, our regrets, and the things we still wanted to do with our lives. It was one of those rare conversations where nothing was off limits. And through it, I realized something important. I wasn't alone in this. I wasn't the only one who had made mistakes, who had been hurt, who had to pick up the pieces of their life and start over. When we returned to the city, I felt different, refreshed, lighter, like I could breathe a little easier. I was starting to see things more clearly, what I wanted, where I was going, and the kind of life I wanted to build. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. I hadn't heard from him in weeks, and I didn't expect to. But I did wonder, sometimes, what would happen if we ever crossed paths again. I didn't want to harbor any resentment toward him, but I couldn't deny that I wasn't the same person I used to be. I had moved on, and I was proud of that. But there was still a part of me that wanted closure. Then, one evening, I got a text. It was from him. "Hey, I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I know I messed up. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I hope you're doing well." I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. There was a time when I would have responded, tried to explain myself, or even accept his apology. But now, I just felt calm. I didn't need his apology to move on. I didn't need him to validate my worth. I typed a reply, simple but final. "Thank you, but I've moved on. I hope you find what you're looking for." It felt like the right thing to do. I didn't need to drag out the past anymore. I had a future to focus on, and that was where my energy was going. I hit send and set the phone down, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. The next few months were a blur of new beginnings. I started taking more risks, both personally and professionally. I finally signed up for the course I had been putting off for years. I signed up for a writing workshop, and I started planning that trip to Italy I'd always dreamed about. Little by little, I was making my dreams a reality. I was finally living for me, without apology, without regret, and that was everything. It's funny how time has a way of teaching you things you never thought you'd learn. Sometimes it's the quiet moments, the ones that seem insignificant at first, that turn out to be the most revealing. I'd spent so long trying to outrun the past, and now I was starting to realize that maybe it wasn't about outrunning it at all. Maybe it was about making peace with it. I started focusing more on my writing. It wasn't something I had planned to do, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had a story to tell. All those feelings, all those experiences I had shoved away, suddenly felt important. I wanted to share them, not just for myself, but for others who might be going through something similar. I signed up for an online course, started attending, writing workshops, and began making connections with other writers. It was a small step, but it felt significant. I wasn't just doing something for myself anymore. I was doing it for a bigger reason. Writing wasn't just a hobby. It was a way of healing, a way of making sense of everything that had happened. I realized that the pain I had felt in the past wasn't something I needed to avoid. It was something I could transform into something beautiful. Leah was incredibly supportive through all of this. She encouraged me to keep writing, to keep pushing forward. She was the friend I didn't even know I needed, and every time I doubted myself, she was there to remind me of my worth. One night, after finishing another short story, I sat down with a glass of wine and read it over. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that, in itself, felt like an accomplishment. I thought about everything I had gone through to get here, the mistakes, the heartbreak, the doubts, and I realized that they had all brought me to this point. Without them, I wouldn't have had the courage to pick up a pen and start writing. I hadn't heard from him in months, but one evening, out of nowhere, I received another message. This one was different. I saw something today that reminded me of you. It's funny how things come full circle, isn't it? I hope you're doing okay. For a moment, I was frozen. My stomach twisted, my heart raced, and I felt that familiar surge of emotions. The anger, the hurt, the longing. But then I took a deep breath and reminded myself how far I had come. I had worked so hard to get to this place, and I wasn't going to let his words take me back to where I had been. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I closed my eyes and thought about everything I had built, everything I had worked for. I thought about the life I was creating for myself, the person I was becoming, and I realized that I didn't need his validation anymore. I didn't need him to tell me that I was doing okay, because I already knew I was. When I finally responded, I kept it simple. I'm doing great, actually. Thanks for checking in. That was it. No explanation, no apology, no conversation about what happened between us. Just the truth. I was doing great. And that was enough. As time went on, I continued to focus on my own growth. I traveled more, met new people, and discovered things about myself I hadn't even known were there. I felt more alive than I had in years. And the more I embraced the unknown, the more confident I became in my ability to handle whatever came my way. I wasn't the same person I had been when we first met. I wasn't the same person who had clung to a relationship that didn't serve me, that left me questioning my worth. I was someone new, stronger, wiser, and more certain of who I was and what I deserved. And as I stood on the brink of this new chapter, I couldn't help but feel grateful for everything that had happened. The mistakes, the heartbreak, the lessons, they had all led me here. They had all helped me become the person I was meant to be. The journey wasn't over yet. There were still more stories to write, more adventures to have. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready for whatever came next. I used to think that closure came from a big moment, the kind of dramatic finality you see in movies. A confrontation, a confession, some kind of dramatic goodbye. But as I sat there sipping my coffee, thinking back on everything that had happened, I realized that closure doesn't always come in the form of a grand gesture. Sometimes it comes quietly in the space between the moments when you finally accept the past for what it is. I'd started to notice that my life was unfolding in ways I hadn't planned, and yet it felt right. The unpredictability that once scared me now felt like freedom. I'd been waiting for some kind of sign, some kind of moment to prove that I was moving in the right direction, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the signs were already there. They'd always been there, if I'd only bothered to look. My writing had started to get noticed. I'd submitted some of my stories to a few literary magazines, and to my surprise, they were accepted. I had a few small publishing credits now, and I was starting to get paid for my work. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to remind me that I was on the right path. One afternoon, while walking through a park, I received a call from Leah. Her voice was upbeat, but there was a hint of something else there, a kind of excitement, almost like she couldn't wait to tell me something. "I think it's time we have a serious talk," she said, almost out of breath. "I've been thinking about something, and I need your advice." Her words made me stop in my tracks. It was rare for Leah to ask for advice, and when she did, I knew it was something important. I found a bench and sat down. My curiosity piqued. "What's going on?" I asked. "I think I've been holding myself back," she confessed. "I've been so focused on everyone else's expectations that I've forgotten what I really want. And I've been thinking, I think I want to take a leap, just like you did." I smiled to myself. Leah had always been the practical one, the person who made careful, calculated decisions. The idea of her taking a leap was surprising, but also exactly what she needed. She had always been there for me, and now it seemed like it was my turn to be there for her. "I think you should. Go for it," I said, feeling a sense of pride in her. "You've always known what you're capable of. Maybe it's time you started listening to yourself more than you listened to everyone else." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and when she spoke again, her voice was full of confidence. "You're right. I'm going to do it." We talked for a while longer, and by the time we hung up, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for our friendship. It was funny how, in a way, we had both been on similar journeys, just in different ways. We had both been learning how to listen to ourselves, how to trust our instincts, and how to take risks that were worth taking. As the weeks passed, I found myself starting to embrace the idea of change even more. I took a weekend trip by myself to a city I'd never been to before, just to see what it felt like to go somewhere new without any particular plan in mind. And you know what? It was amazing. I spent hours just walking around, soaking in the unfamiliar sights, and letting myself be guided by impulse. It wasn't about the destination. It was about the freedom of not having to know exactly where I was going. I could feel the weight of the past lifting off my shoulders bit by bit, And with each step, I felt like I was getting closer to the person I was meant to be. When I came back, I made a decision. I was going to take my writing more seriously. I wasn't going to wait around for the perfect moment or for someone else to tell me I was ready. I was already ready, and I was going to make the most of it. That night, as I sat at my desk, typing out a new story, I realized something. The past had shaped me, yes, but it no longer had control over me. I had let go of the idea that I needed to be defined by my past relationships, by my mistakes, or by the version of myself I had once been. I was something new now, something better. And I had everything I needed to build the future I wanted. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. The first time I saw him after everything had fallen apart, it was completely by accident. I'd been walking through the downtown area when I spotted him at a cafe, sitting with a friend. I almost turned around and walked in the opposite direction. But something made me pause. Something that felt like curiosity mixed with a strange sense of calm. He hadn't noticed me yet. I wasn't sure what I would say if he did, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that this moment was inevitable. He was part of my past now, and I'd always known that one day I'd have to face him. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I knew that I'd gotten stronger over the last few months. So I walked in. It was a quiet decision, one that didn't feel dramatic, but it was enough. I took a seat at the bar, ordering a drink that I didn't even want. My eyes kept flicking toward him, and it wasn't long before he looked up and caught my gaze. His expression froze for a moment, and for the briefest second, I wondered if he'd run. But he didn't. Instead, he did what I least expected. He waved me over. "Hey, we need to talk," he said, his voice almost too casual. It was like he was pretending nothing had ever happened, pretending we were just two people who had once shared a life and were now picking up right where we left off. But I wasn't the same person anymore. I couldn't just slip back into the past, not after everything that had changed. I walked over to his table slowly, sitting down without saying a word. The silence between us was heavy at first, and I could feel the tension in the air. He glanced down at his drink, his hands fidgeting with the glass, clearly unsure of how to start. "I know I screwed up," he said, his voice quieter now. "I was an idiot. I didn't think." "Yeah," I cut him off, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. "You didn't think. That was the problem. You never thought about me. You never thought about how your actions would affect me. You just did things." He winced at my words, but he didn't try to argue. I could see the guilt in his eyes, but it didn't matter anymore. It wasn't enough. It never would be. "You hurt me," I continued, my voice low but firm, "but I'm not here to get into all the details. What's done is done. I've let it go." His brow furrowed as if he couldn't quite comprehend what I was saying. "You've let it go?" he repeated, his tone almost incredulous. "Just like that?" Shrugged. "Just like that. I realized that I don't need you to fix what you broke. I've fixed it myself. I'm not the same person I was when I left." He was quiet for a long time, as if weighing my words. I wasn't sure if he understood, but that wasn't the point. I had finally come to terms with the fact that I didn't need him to validate me. I didn't need him to apologize, even though he probably wanted to. I had learned how to stand on my own. That's good to hear," he said after a moment, his voice softer now. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't deserve you." I nodded, but I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. The apology was nice, but it wasn't what I needed. What I needed was to walk away, to prove that I could stand alone and be strong without his approval or forgiveness. And that was exactly what I did. When I stood up to leave, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The past was over, and I was finally free from it. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. It wasn't about forgetting him. It was about accepting that he was no longer part of my story. And that was okay. I was writing my own story now. I took a deep breath, feeling the wind against my skin, and smiled. The future was wide open, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it would take me. The next few weeks felt like a blur. Everything was shifting, both the small things and the bigger moments that seemed to define the next chapter of my life. I started looking at things with a fresh perspective, one where I didn't constantly feel like I was playing second fiddle in someone else's life. I threw myself into work, not in the way that people say they work, to forget their problems, but in a way that felt intentional and fulfilling. I took on new projects, ones that challenged me in ways I hadn't expected, and I found joy in the small victories, like solving a problem that felt impossible just a day earlier. There was something freeing about knowing that all of this was mine to own. And then there was him, no longer the looming presence he used to be. I didn't know exactly what I was supposed to feel when I thought about him now, but I wasn't angry anymore. The more I thought about the time we'd spent together, the less I wanted to carry the bitterness. I wasn't going to let him continue to weigh me down, especially not when I had so much to look forward to. There was a part of me that wondered if I should reach out again, if maybe we could try to salvage a friendship after all the mess. But then I reminded myself that I wasn't in a rush to share my life with someone who had once thought so little of me. No, I was doing just fine on my own. One afternoon, while I was sipping coffee and scrolling through my emails, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from an unknown number. I frowned, a little hesitant, but opened it anyway. "Hey, it's me. I was wondering if we could talk." My heart didn't race at the sight of his name. It didn't send me into a spiral of uncertainty, either. I read the message twice before I put my phone back down. Part of me felt a strange sense of closure, like this was a final check-in before both of us moved on. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I focused on the things that mattered, my friends, my family, the things that were actually in my control. For the first time in a long time, I felt settled in my own skin. A few days later, I was at the coffee shop again when I saw a familiar face. It was Sophie, one of my closest friends from university. She looked up, caught my eye, and waved me over. Her smile was warm, and I couldn't help but return it. "Hey," she greeted me as I sat down. "How have you been?" "Good," I said, the words slipping easily from my lips. "Really good, actually." She raised an eyebrow. "Really good? That sounds almost too positive." I laughed. "Yeah, I guess it is. Things are going well. I'm just in a better place now." Sophie nodded, looking like she understood without needing any further explanation. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve it." It wasn't the first time someone had said that to me, but this time, it felt like the truth. I did deserve better. I deserved to be the lead character in my own story, not just a supporting role to someone else's drama. And as I sat there, with Sophie, laughing and talking about everything and nothing, I realized how much I'd been holding back all these years. How much I'd been waiting for someone else's approval, for some validation that I was worthy. But I didn't need to wait anymore. I was worthy, all on my own. "Hey, have you heard about that new startup? The one with the tech app?" Sophie asked, snapping me out of my thoughts. I shook my head. "No, I haven't. What's it about?" She leaned in a little, excitement building in her voice. "It's pretty cool. They're doing some groundbreaking work and they're hiring. You should totally check it out." My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't been looking for anything new, but the idea of a fresh start, something that could challenge me and push me further, felt right. Maybe this was the next step. Maybe this was how I was supposed to move forward. We spent the next few hours catching up on life, but all the while, my mind was buzzing with possibilities. I didn't need anyone to tell me what to do anymore. I had the power to decide. I had the power to create my own path, one where I was the protagonist in my own journey. When I got home that evening, I pulled up the startup's website and started reading. Before I knew it, I was sending in my application, knowing that whatever happened next, I was stepping into a new chapter with my head held high. I spent the following week in a quiet frenzy, working, thinking, planning. The world felt a little bigger, a little more open than it had before. Every day was a new opportunity to do something different, something that mattered to me. I hadn't realized how much I'd been living on autopilot, waiting for someone else's validation or approval before I could make my next move. But now I was making decisions for myself, and that felt powerful. The email came on a Thursday afternoon. It was from the startup I'd applied to. I read it twice to make sure I wasn't imagining things. "We'd love to invite you for an interview," it said. I don't think I'd ever clicked on a link faster in my life. I didn't need to read the rest of the email to know this was the chance I'd been waiting for. It wasn't about escaping. What had happened with him? It was about moving towards something that I wanted, something I could shape on my own terms. I couldn't deny that there was a small part of me that was still haunted by the memory of that text. Plan B. That had been the title he'd assigned me, but I'd turned it around. I was no longer the backup plan. I was the plan. My plan. It wasn't easy to let go of the past entirely. Every now and then, his name would pop up on my phone, or I'd hear a song that reminded me of him. It didn't bring back the pain it once did, but there were still moments where I would wonder if I'd made the right choice. Maybe I'd been too harsh. Maybe we could have worked things out if I'd just given it more time. But then I'd remember the way I felt when I first saw that text. The rush of disbelief, the sense of betrayal. No, it had been the right choice. I was better off now. I spent the next few days preparing for the interview. I researched the company, read about its mission and its people. I practiced answering the questions I imagined they might ask me. But more than anything, I allowed myself to feel excited. For the first time in a long while, I was looking forward to something. I wasn't waiting for anyone to give me permission. I was going for it. The day of the interview, I woke up early, nerves fluttering in my stomach. I had a routine now. Something I'd developed to ground myself before big moments. I took a long shower, got dressed in my best, and spent a little extra time doing my makeup. There was something empowering about doing it all for myself, not for anyone else. As I sat down for the interview, I felt confident. Not overconfident, but sure of myself. I knew I had the skills they were looking for. I knew I was capable. The questions came and went, but the one that stuck with me was the last one. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? It was a simple question, but one that I'd been struggling with. I'd spent so many years reacting to the plans other people had for me that I'd forgotten to think about my own future. But now, sitting across from them, I could see it clearly. I could see myself working here, growing, learning, taking on challenges. I could see myself building something of my own. I see myself leading a team, I answered. Building something innovative, something that makes a difference. I see myself taking chances and being unafraid to fail. Because if you're not willing to fail, then you're not really living. The interviewer smiled. That's a great answer. I left the building feeling lighter than I had in months. I didn't know yet whether I'd get the job, but I knew I was on the right path. No matter what happened, I had found my way forward. That night, as I walked home, I couldn't help but think back to that anniversary dinner. The gift, the text, the way I'd handed him the framed message. I just became plan A for someone better. That was my truth now. I wasn't anyone's backup. I was my own primary plan. And that was enough. When I got home, I sat down at my desk and opened my email inbox. There was a new message waiting for me. Congratulations! We are excited to offer you the position. I smiled. I had done it. The email still glowed on my screen, but this time I didn't need to reread it. I'd already taken in every word, already felt the rush of accomplishment flood my chest. I sat back, letting it sink in. The months of uncertainty, the painful breakup, the texts and the doubts, it had all led to this moment. It felt surreal, almost like I'd stepped into a new chapter of my life, one I'd written for myself. But there was something more than just the job offer. It wasn't the validation I'd been craving, nor the sense of triumph over someone who had never really seen my worth. No, it was the understanding that I'd done this on my own. It was the strength I'd found within myself to walk away from the past and move forward without fear. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath. The room felt different now. There was space for something new. phone buzzed beside me, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a text from Maya, one of the only people who truly understood how hard it had been to get to this point. "You did it," she wrote. "So proud of you. Time to celebrate." I smiled at the screen, a sense of warmth filling me. Maya had been there when I needed her most, when I couldn't even understand what I was going through. I knew she'd be the first person to join me in this next step, and I couldn't wait to share the news. But even as I typed a quick response to her, another thought crossed my mind. The person I was now, stronger, more self-assured, more independent, wasn't the same person I had been when I first walked away. I could still feel the weight of the past, but it no longer had control over me. I had taken the narrative of my life into my own hands. I reached for my phone again, this time dialing the one number I hadn't called since the anniversary dinner. Saminsa. Phone rang. Once. Twice. "Hello?" His voice, the one I used to know so well, now sounded distant. I took a steadying breath. "Hey," I said softly. "I just wanted to let you know. I got the job, the one I interviewed for. I start next month." There was silence on the other end, and I could almost feel him absorbing the weight of my words. "That's great," he said, though the emotion didn't quite match the words. "I'm happy," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm really happy." It was true. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for someone else's approval. I wasn't letting anyone define me, least of all him. "I just wanted to let you know," I continued, "that I'm okay. No hard feelings. I'm moving forward, and I'm proud of where I am now." "Good for you," he said. The conversation ended shortly after that. No more words were needed. I didn't need his validation anymore. I had something far more valuable, my own sense of peace. As I set my phone down, I couldn't help but smile. I had learned something important along the way. I had been Plan B, but now I was the one who had written my own story, and that was something worth celebrating. I picked up my phone and sent Maya a message. "Let's grab drinks tomorrow. I think I have a lot to celebrate." It felt like the perfect way to begin this new chapter.